Good afternoon, my name is Eshipton, and for the next 20 minutes I want to share with you a presentation I put together called Revelation, Response, and Redemption, which is my call to the ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so first of all, I say greetings to you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, and may His grace and peace be with you today as you watch this video. My call to ministry actually is a two-pronged call. The first is a call to pastoral vocation, and the second is a call to adoption. But it didn't start that way initially. As I think back to my call, it started when I was 11 or 12 years old on a Sunday evening. I had just gotten back in from church. I'd settled down for bed for the evening, and as I fell asleep, had a vision. I had something of a dream of a man, an older man, kind of like what you see on the screen there, come to me and say something along the lines of, "You're called to be in the ministry. You're going to be a pastor." And as a young child, didn't really know what to think of it. And so I went back to sleep, and then the next day it was still sticking with me. And so I decided that I would tell my cousins what I had dreamt. And they said what you may be thinking right now. They said, "Yeah, right, sure, you're going to be a pastor. Sure you had a dream. Sure you saw that old man," or what have you. And so they ridiculed me a bit. They dismissed it. And we never really spoke about it again. But I didn't stop there. I didn't actually forget about the dream. And I had heard about something in church. I go to Welcome Church of God at the time, and I'd heard about this idea of fleecing. It's the idea that when Gideon was called, he put a fleece out to the Lord. And so I said, I'm going to do that. I said, "Lord, I'm going to put a fleece before you, and if you're calling me to your ministry, would you have someone who doesn't know that I had this dream come and tell me I'm supposed to be in the ministry?" And so I put this fleece out to the Lord, and as I put the fleece out, I had the same idea that what happened in the story of Gideon would happen to me, that the next morning I would wake up and the fleece would be answered. And so as we often think about Bible stories, we see them as these stories that happen immediately, but we really don't have an appreciation sometimes for the amount of time that's passing between the events that occurred. And so as a child, I put this fleece out to God because I heard about it. And this isn't the time to think about or talk about whether that was biblical or not. It's just what I did. It's what I knew and what I had been taught. And so each day at Welcome Church of God, which is what you see on the screen here, I would go in on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Monday night prayer meetings, Wednesday church, and as I sat in the pew, I just knew that that day was the day that God was going to answer my fleece. That was the day which someone was going to come up to me and say, "Eric, you're called to be in the ministry." Well, I sat there day after day, Sunday after Sunday, week after week, and it never happened. And even on special revivals and when we had special pastors and things like that come in, I would say, "Okay, today's the day that I'm going to get my fleece answered." And frankly, it never happened. And so as time passed, weeks, months, and years passed, the dream went to the side, and I did what everybody else does. You move on with life, and you see it as something, well, maybe they were right. Maybe that wasn't a dream calling me into ministry. Maybe it was just, the food you had for dinner that night, or something that you saw on TV or something like that. So I did. I moved on with life, and as you see on the screen here, I went to junior college and got a degree in computer science. Then I went and got my bachelor's degree at UNC Charlotte in Management Information Systems and Business. And then I went to East Carolina and got an MBA with a Healthcare Administration certificate. And I was really working my way up the healthcare ladder at Wake Forest Baptist Health. I had been there 10 years before the Lord would call on me again. And as a healthcare executive, getting on with my life, putting what I saw as a call, but other people didn't confirm, and the fleece didn't get confirmed as something of just a dream. And that is until my wife and I moved to Clemens in 2011. And when we moved to Clemens in 2011, it was just a short period of time after my twins, Caleb and Annabelle, were born. So we have an older son named Ethan. He is now 10, and Caleb and Annabelle, I'm happy to say, turned 8 in October. But the picture you see here is them in the NICU, and the ring I have on my finger is actually the ring you see on their feet. And on their toes there. And so what you're seeing there is how small they were. And so we moved in 2011 to Clemens and started attending River Oaks Community Church. And I mentioned Caleb and Annabelle because the next part of my story, they become foundational to it. And as I'm sitting in the pew at River Oaks, it's in around the year 2012 or so, Sonny Flowers, pictured here, is preaching. What he was preaching on, I don't remember. I just remember that he was the one preaching. And as he was preaching, my mind began to wander and think about other things, and I frankly, again, don't remember what he was preaching on. And at that time, in front of me, there was two women, and they were sitting there, and they had a child with them, and as the one woman picked that child up, and it was a toddler, young boy, it looked like from Hispanic origin, maybe 2 years old. They passed him between one another, and the gap between the two people, between the seats, when that young man went between those two women, our eyes locked. And when our eyes locked, my world slowed down. And it was as if there was nothing else around me but me and the child, and our eyes were locked. And whether I heard an audible voice or it was a voice in my head, I couldn't tell you. This may be another yeah right moment for you, but it was real for me. And when our eyes locked, I heard, I'm calling you to adopt, and I'm called you to ministry. And for me, this is the furthest thing from my mind. If you recall, I've got 3 kids now. 2 of them are twins. They've just gotten out of the NICU. Adoption is so far from anything I would even be thinking about, you know. And so it was a really just shaking moment. I mean, it kind of shook me a little bit as I think about that moment, because why would I even be thinking about adoption? And so from that point on, I began to really think about that moment in church. And so every morning as I did my prayers, I had a routine. As I drove to work, I'd pray every morning because I had a decent drive, and that was my time alone with God. And as I prayed, I said, Lord, I said, adoption? Like, I have 3 kids already. How is it that I need a 4th child? And you'll see later in the presentation that he didn't want me to have a 4th child. He wanted me to have a 4th, 5th, and 6th child. And I just didn't understand that at the time. But adoption, Father, and then I've got on with life. How are you calling me to ministry? I am a successful young executive, one of the youngest directors at a prestigious academic medical center, and on the way up in promotion. Ministry just isn't fitting in the plans because I've got bills and I have twins, and as I prayed those prayers and I kept telling God more and more each day what I didn't have time or capacity for, He continued to weigh me down with the burden of adoption and ministry. So much so that about 4 months of those prayers was all I could take. And after about 4 months of this, I can remember it was a weekday. I don't remember what weekday it was, but I had become so burdened with this. One evening, my wife Hannah was upstairs in the bedroom reading, and I walked upstairs. And as I walked upstairs, I was visibly crying and tears streaming down my face. And as I walked into the bedroom, I began to weep even more. And I just kind of fell down to my knees, and I said the words that every woman longs to hear in the middle of the night from her husband. Honey, I've got something to tell you, and I don't want you to be mad. Now, I don't know about you, but if to hear those words and seeing somebody as distraught as I was would likely strike fear into your heart, and like, where are the bodies buried? What's her name? You know, all types of stories you begin to make up. And she said, as best she could, she said, okay. And I walked over and sat on the bed beside her, and I grabbed her hands and I said, honey, I got to tell you a story about what happened at River Oaks a couple of months ago. And then I told her the story. And I don't know if it's the way that I did it, but there was a look of relief on her face. And she immediately confirmed that adoption was something she was feeling as well, which I thought was amazing. And she said, I also want to hear more about this call to ministry that you're talking about. And so from there, we began our journey to figure out what this meant from adoption and ministry. And the picture you see on your screen here is a picture of my wife and I on a canoeing trip, a kayaking trip we just took a year and a half ago on our anniversary. The faithfulness that Hannah has had through my process in seminary and through the adoption and overseeing a lot of that stuff I owe a huge debt of gratitude to her for that. But also this is proof that she didn't divorce me for saying that I had something to tell her that late at night in that way. But she was very gracious in that, and I'm so thankful for that. But as we marched on in the process, we started to figure out what it meant to be called to adoption. What does it mean to say that you're going to adopt a child? And we knew nothing about it. We haven't researched it. So we began the research process. Are we going to do a domestic adoption, an international adoption? Which one would be right for us? And as we prayed about it more and more, we were moved towards international adoption. And the thing that kept sticking out in our mind is that the infant mortality rate, the kids from international countries, was so low that we felt like they had less of a chance of life than the kids in America. And so we chose international adoption, and we were so sure that international adoption, because my wife is fluent in Spanish and has an affinity for that culture and has spent a lot of time working with the migrant farmers and things of that nature, that we should adopt from a Latin or Hispanic country. And so we went through all the countries and prayed about it, and we decided on Colombia. And it wasn't long after we decided on Colombia that Colombia closed, and it wasn't an option anymore for our family. And so, disappointed, we went through again, and at this time we picked Ethiopia. And as we were praying about Ethiopia, we were in the process with a Lifeline Adoption Agency. The process just kept dragging on and on and on until we were 5 years in the process, and no match, and Ethiopia closes its borders to international adoption. And we'd put so much time and effort and resource over that journey that we were disappointed and heartbroken that we were so close to a match. It didn't happen, and we lost a lot of money. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. And so we then decided, what is it that we are going to do? And we still feel like we're called to adoption. The countries keep closing. We've been in the adoption process now for 5 years, 5.5 years or so, and nothing's come of it. And so I told my wife, I said, let's do this. I said, let's pick every international country and the United States that we're called, that are available for us to adopt from with 3 kids. And let's pray for one each day. And we'll fast for one meal and pray for that country. And at the end of that time, we came across the world adoptions with a lady named Michelle Trewell in Liberia. And as we did this, I was not as convinced as my wife was to begin with, but she said, I think we're called to adopt from Liberia. And so we went down the path, and almost immediately after we chose Liberia and across the world, and we told them we were looking for a child between the ages of 2 and 6, a female if possible, and 1. Michelle presented us with a set of 3 children, twins, Romeo and Kuta, and an older sibling named Ruth. And I was shocked. And I recall telling my wife, well, if they were right here in front of me, I would take care of them. But adopting 3 kids, I'm just not sure we can do that. And so we had a little bit of time as our paperwork was in process, and I went through a process of having the kids' pictures on my wall with some questions I'd ask about discerning the will of God and praying over those kids. And seeking counsel from people and hearing oh my goodness, you already have 3, that's going to make you have 6, you know how difficult your life's going to be, to people who are encouraging it and saying, if that's what the Lord has, go for it. And I just remember one day praying over them and hearing a voice in my mind saying to me, Eric, how can you not adopt those kids? Those are the kids I've called you to adopt. And that was kind of a pivotal moment in the process. I told my wife, about that, and then we signed on and said, yes, we will adopt those kids. Well, about that same time, as you recall, we had put a lot of money in the other adoption that we had lost. We came across the idea of Both Hands, and Both Hands is one for the orphan and one for the widow, and it's an organization that puts all of the dollars that you raise towards your adoption. Not $1 goes to actually fund charity, but what you do is you find a widow in your community that needs help. You get a group of people to come together to help her, and people and businesses sponsor you, and that all the money that it sponsors goes towards helping to pay for your adoption. In this process, we met a lady named Goldie Seymour. Now, she passed away about a month and a half ago. That's unfortunate that she won't be able to see our 3 kiddos when we bring them home. In fact, as you're watching this video, it's likely that I'm either in Liberia picking them up, or we've just gotten back from Liberia with Romeo, Ruth, and Kuta. But one of the things that stood out to me about this is that as we became friends with Goldie and she became a part of our life, she said to us, "I'm so glad that you adopted me." And so not only did we adopt, or are in the process of adopting 3 kids and helping in orphans, but we adopted a widow as well, and that has meant the world to our family. And so a call to adoption, starting out in my mind as 1 child, has turned into 3 children and a woman that has already gone on to be with the Lord. And the idea of James 1:27, that the religion that God desires is that we care for the widow and the orphan. And at the same time, in parallel, that we're on the adoption path, the call to ministry is still there. And so after I told my wife about the call to ministry, I went back to my old ways from the early 1990s, 91, 92, and put a fleece back before God. And I said, God, if you're calling me to adoption, if you're calling me to ministry rather, would you have someone that I do not know come and tell me that I'm supposed to be in the ministry? Would you have someone who knows nothing about this come and tell me that I'm supposed to be in the ministry? And so I kind of have you flash back to earlier in the presentation, Welcome Church of God, me sitting in a pew thinking today's the day that I'm going to have someone confirm that I'm supposed to be in the ministry. Well, it wasn't until about a year or so and a half later, sometime between 2012 and 2013, that God actually fulfilled this fleece. It was in the summertime, and about 5 or so months earlier, one of the men from our small group died suddenly in the night from a heart attack. His wife and his daughter that he had adopted were left, and she was moving between homes and asked if I would come help her move. Well, one of the other men that were there that day that was going to help her move was named Alan Newton, and his name is pictured here under the Subway logo. And as we were helping her move, Alan said to me, "Eric, I've been thinking a lot about you lately." And I said, "Alan, that's kind of weird." And he said, No, I'm serious." I said, "Okay." So we had a kind of a joking relationship. He says, "No, I'm serious." He said, "I've been praying for you and thinking about you. And something just tells me that I need to tell you that you should be in the ministry, that you should be a pastor." And as he said that, and as I moved, I can remember that I'm moving things onto the trailer. We're getting the trailer ready to load back up. And as I just sat there, my heart was gripped. And I thought to myself, did the fleece that I put out in 1991 just get answered in 2012? After 8 to a year of discerning this and this locking eyes with this young man in River Oaks, is that what just happened? And the reason the logo from Subway is on the slide is because that's where we went to lunch right after that. And I just remember thinking during this time, the fleece has gotten answered. But it didn't end there. So it took another 2.5 years of discerning and talking with my wife to really answer the call to ministry. And one afternoon after service, as we got into the van, Hannah looked at me and said, it's time. It was time for what? She said, it's time for you to go and answer the call of ministry. And I said, well, I just don't know how that's going to work. And so we left it, and that evening, as she was fixing dinner, I was sitting at my computer, and we were talking, and she said, you should research seminaries. And I said, okay. And so we started looking at them. I went and talked to the pastors at River Oaks and the elders there about going to seminary, and they encouraged me and my call to go to Gordon Conwell. And so God revealed himself in many, many ways, and my responses were not always, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But they were prayerful, long, considerative processes where I wanted to make sure that I was really called to the ministry. And so as you see on the screen, I'm expected to graduate, Lord willing, in May 2019 from Gordon Conwell with my Master's of Divinity. And as you're watching this video, as I stated, we're picking up the children in Liberia in November 2019. We're leaving on the 27th of October. We're supposed to be back in country 11/9. So please pray for that if you're watching this during that time. And after that time, please continue to pray that Romeo, Ruth, and Kuta will be peacefully joined to our family, and we will be hospitable and immediately knit in heart together. But as you look at the picture, see the young gentleman, Romeo, left, and on my wife's lap is Kuta, and then to her left, your right, is Ruth standing there. And so it's coincidence or not, it'll be 7 years from the call at River Oaks until completion of answering the call to ministry preparation and starting the journey of ministry and starting the journey of adoptive parent with Romeo, Ruth, and Kuta. Which brings me to the third part of the presentation, which is redemption's call. And what is my call post graduating Gordon Conwell? What is my call post the adoption being finalized and Romeo, Ruth, and Kuta being my children in my home with my other 3 kids? And the idea around being called to a place and time, or for such a time as this, has been part of my call to ministry the entire time. The story of Joseph, the story of Ruth, the story of Queen Esther, and that we are all made and specifically called to a certain place, time, and people. Now, I don't know what that call is for my life right now. It hasn't been fully identified where God will have me, except my first call into ministry, or where I'll go in vocational ministry to begin with. But I also remember and that Joseph and Queen Esther and Ruth did not know that they were biblical characters. They were living their life day to day, and each ordinary day to them, maybe some extraordinary days like I've talked about in this presentation, were the ministry was the journey, not the destination. And so we keep in mind that our ministry is the journey. My ministry during this time, through answering this call, through each of these ways that God has called me, has prepared me for this specific moment. And as I consider what my full-time vocation is, I had just received the honor in September of this year to come under care of the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. The elders of the Mid-Atlantic Presbytery on September 19th came around and put their arms around me, listened to my testimony, and confirmed and affirmed my call to ministry, and allowed me to come under care of that denomination. And Lord willing, when I graduate in May, I will be ordained in that denomination. But I don't have a call specifically to a church, to a vocation, to a job at this point. However, I have had the opportunity to help plant a church from River Oaks Community Church called Restoration Community Church. And for the last almost 3 years now, I've been in all types of leadership positions, from sweeping the floors all the way to finances and executive leadership at Restoration Community Church, as the Lord has not only prepared me through Gordon Conwell, but also in practical application at Restoration Community Church. And so I lean on the Lord, and I'm trusting Him that He has a call for me for such a time as this. And as I talk about a call for me, it's not really my call. You see, a call in my estimation, as I've grown through my years at Gordon Conwell, is really a call to my family, not just a call for me, because we'll have to walk through this together as a journey. But more than just a call to my family, it is also a call to a people and to a place for the giftings He's given me to share with them during this time and during this season. And so as I finish up my presentation, I would ask that you continue to pray for me, that God would reveal Himself in the call that He has for me, the full-time vocation that He has for me, and that I would be able to step out in faith in that as the Eshipton 8, as we now call ourselves, step forward as I graduate Gordon Conwell. And I pray that you all are well, and I pray grace and peace over you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ.